with his granddaughter in surgery 3 floors above, and a thunderstorm grounding half the flights over Pearson, Graham Pallister arrived at the Northgate Marquise in downtown Toronto carrying 1 overnight bag and a reservation confirmation he had printed at a Petro-Canada north of Barrie. He was 54 years old, wearing a flannel shirt and work boots that had not been chosen for this city, and the woman at the front desk smiled at him the way people smile at someone they expect will not be difficult. He had driven from Timmins in just under 5 hours. Room 312 was the only ground floor suite with direct access to the hospital connector, the enclosed walkway that linked the Marquis to Toronto General's recovery wing. Dr. Aishan Nkemdi had told him specifically to take that room and stay in it. She had explained, without making it sound casual, that surgery would run until approximately 7:30 in the evening, that complications requiring family consent could arise, and that the connector allowed her team to bring the family member through without routing them back into the emergency intake on University Avenue. She had been clear about what she meant by complications. Graham had booked 312 at noon, standing beside the fuel pump with the receipt still printing. The confirmation number was folded in his shirt pocket. He was at the desk by 4:15. He had been there less than 10 minutes when Serena Blight came through the lobby doors. She was in her mid-40s in a slate gray blazer that had been made for her, and she moved through the atrium with the practiced ease of someone who had stopped noticing lobbies a long time ago. 2 people followed with rolling cases. She went directly to the front desk and did not begin with pleasantries. Her suite on the 8th floor had a water leak. Maintenance had confirmed it 40 minutes ago. She had a dinner meeting in the Marquis' private dining room at 6:30 and a full day of boardroom sessions starting at 8 the following morning, and she needed a room that did not have wet carpet. The associate at the counter, Kim Delacroix, her badge read, 8 months on the job, dark ponytail, the particular stillness of someone trying to do the right thing under pressure, told her that the only available ground floor accommodation was 312, and that 312 was reserved for a guest who had already confirmed. Serena asked her to look again. Kim did and said the same thing. Serena walked to the far end of the desk where the duty manager was finishing a call. His name was Todd Newbury. He had been with Northgate for 16 years, and he knew Serena the way a duty manager knows a guest who had stayed 43 nights in 12 months and charged most of them to a corporate account with a billing code he had memorized. He came around the counter immediately. Graham watched the conversation from where he stood. He could not hear all of it. He heard the word sweet and the word inconvenient, and he heard Newbury say of course twice. Then Newbury came to Graham's side of the counter and asked, with a version of a smile, whether there was an issue with the payment method on the reservation. Graham told him there was not. Newbury said that same-day bookings made on an unfamiliar card sometimes required secondary verification, and that the system had flagged the reservation for review. Graham asked when the flag had appeared. Newbury said he couldn't speak to the precise timing of automated processes. Graham asked whether the flag had appeared before or after the woman in the gray blazer had spoken to him. Newbury said he was not in a position to discuss other guests. What followed was 15 minutes that Graham would remember clearly afterward, not because anything was said loudly, but because of how quietly it all moved. Newbury made 2 calls. One was to someone in corporate accounts, a name he used as though presenting credentials. The other was shorter, and he kept his back to the lobby while he made it. When he was done, he returned to the counter and told Graham that the reservation had been placed under administrative review, that he could not confirm the room in the interim, and that if there were no other cards available, he was welcome to contact reservations about availability at partner properties. Graham set both hands flat on the counter. He did not raise his voice. He explained that his granddaughter was in surgery at Toronto General, that the surgery was expected to finish sometime around 7:30, that Dr. Nkemdi had specifically directed him to this hotel, this room, so that consent could be reached quickly if the situation changed. He said it the way a person states a fact they have already absorbed without asking for sympathy. Newbury said he was sorry to hear it, and that the review was still ongoing, and that he couldn't make exceptions to security protocol regardless of circumstances. Serena had not left the lobby. She stood near the entrance with her coat over one arm, and she approached when Newbury stepped away to take another call. She told Graham she was sorry about his granddaughter. She said it without looking away, and for a moment it was there in her face, something human, before it closed again. Then she said she had 30 people arriving in the morning who needed her to be functional, and that if it was a matter of money, she was prepared to make it simple. She named $3,000. Graham told her the room was not available for purchase. She said $5,000 with a cab to any other hotel in the radius, and her assistant would handle the transfer tonight. Graham shook his head without speaking. She said $8,000 and said she meant it. He told her the amount did not change the problem. He told her that $312 was not a preference. It was the difference between being reachable in 4 minutes and being reachable in 40, and that if she had ever sat in a waiting room not knowing whether a doctor was going to appear and say the thing that ends your world, she might understand why he was not going to move. Serena looked at him for a moment. Something moved across her expression. Then she turned and went back to her assistant. Graham stood at the counter for another 11 minutes. At 4:20, Newbury returned and told him that the review had concluded, that the reservation was canceled, that a refund would be issued in 5 to 7 business days, and that he was happy to assist with a transfer to the Westin or the Intercontinental. He did not raise his voice then either. He looked at the clock behind the counter. It read 4:21. Surgery ended at approximately 7:30. He had a little more than 3 hours, and he was standing in the lobby of the building the hospital had told him to be in. He picked up his bag and walked to the far end of the front desk, where Kim Delacroix was processing a check-in on the adjacent terminal. He waited until she had finished, then leaned slightly forward. "The property ownership record for this hotel," he said quietly. "Northgate Marcus. It's in your corporate directory under the Compliance tab. I'm asking you to open it and look at the name listed as the beneficial owner of the parent trust. 2 clicks. That's all I'm asking." Kim looked at him. He held her gaze and said nothing more. Then he walked to the guest services counter at the center of the atrium, set his bag on the floor, and asked the concierge standing there, a young man whose badge read Luke, to pull the ownership record for the Northgate Marquis. Luke said that was not something he could access from that station, which was not accurate, and that guest services couldn't assist with administrative matters, and that he should return to the front desk. Graham said he would wait. By 4:30, the story had moved through the lobby the way things move through a hotel, from the front desk to the concierge station to the bell captain by the door. A few guests near the atrium seating had gone quiet. Serena stood 20 feet back, watching with the expression of someone who has won something and is finding it less satisfying than expected. Newbury came across the lobby with a printout in his hand. He told Graham that the cancellation was final and that continuing to occupy the guest services counter would be logged as a disruption. He used the words policy and protocol twice each. He said he had been in hospitality for 16 years and that he recognized what Graham was doing, which was running the clock until he could claim the hotel had caused him to miss something. Graham told him he was not running anything. He said his granddaughter's name. He said she was 17 years old and had been on the ice at Timmins District Arena 2 days ago and was now in a surgical suite in the building across the walkway, and that he was going to stand at this counter until someone in this building did a 2-click search. He said it quietly. He said it once. Serena's assistant, who had been standing close to Newbury's elbow, leaned toward her and said something low. Serena looked at the printout Newbury was still holding, then looked across the lobby at Graham, at the flannel shirt, the overnight bag on the floor, the work boots, and her face went through something that was harder to name. What Graham did not know was that Kim Delacroix had already run the record. She had run it at 4 from the adjacent terminal while she was supposed to be closing out a check-in. She had done it because a man had stood at the end of her counter and named the exact tab in the exact language of the internal directory. She had worked at the Northgate Marquis for 8 months and had never once heard a guest use that language. The record opened in the plain gray format of internal documents, Northgate Marquis, Wholly-owned property of Northgate Hospitality Group, parent entity Pallister Holdings Incorporated, controlling interest held through the Pallister Family Trust, beneficial owner and founder, natural person, Graham R. Pallister, date of birth, residential address in Timmins, Ontario. She read it twice. Then she looked at the cancelled reservation still open on the screen beside it. Room 312, Pallister, Graham R. She sat very still for a moment. She did not make an announcement. She did what her training said to do, which was escalate a compliance flag through the 2 channels designated for that category, the property management email and the general manager's direct line. At 22 minutes past 4, Felix Girard's phone rang in his second-floor office. He was reviewing a staffing report for the weekend. He listened for 12 seconds, said say that again, listened for another 20, and was on his feet before the call was finished. At 25 past, the compliance mailbox forwarded automatically to the executive duty line. In a boardroom in Mississauga, Marion Sutcliffe's phone lit up on the table in front of her. Sutcliffe had been president of Northgate Hospitality Group for 2 years. She had met Graham Pallister on 4 occasions, all of them in rooms with fewer than 5 people, and she had signed a confidentiality agreement covering his identity before she had signed her employment contract. She read the alert, stood up mid-sentence, and walked out of the room. In the lobby, a uniformed security officer had arrived and was asking Graham, not unkindly, whether he would be willing to move to the seating area. Graham said he understood and did not move. Serena had come closer again. She said she would make it $10,000. She said she would have her assistant drive him to the hospital entrance and wait in the atrium there if that was what he needed. She said she was trying to find a solution. Graham asked whether she had children. She was quiet for a moment. She said she had a daughter. She said she was 11. He told her to imagine her daughter was 17 and on a surgical table in a city where the only person who cared whether she lived or died was standing in a hotel lobby being offered $10,000 to go somewhere else. He said it without anger. He said it as a fact. Serena did not answer. At 29 minutes past 4, Felix Girard came through the interior door at a pace that general managers do not typically use in public spaces. He had a tablet in one hand and a lanyard bouncing against his chest. He walked past Newbury. He walked past Serena. He stopped in front of Graham Pallister and stood for a moment the way a person does when they are confirming with their own eyes something they have already been told. "Mr. Pallister," he said. The 2 people nearest heard the way he said it. Graham told him he had a cancelled reservation on room 312 and that he needed to be in the building. Girard turned. He looked at Newbury. He looked at the printout in Newbury's hand. He looked at Kim Delacroix behind the counter. Something happened to his face that was quieter than anger and worse. "Reinstate it," he said. Kim typed. From where Graham stood, he could see the screen, and he watched the reservation return to active status in under 5 seconds, which was approximately how long the entire process had ever required. Newbury started to ask what was happening. No one answered him. In the silence, Girard's tablet chimed. He glanced at it and passed it to Newbury without a word. Graham watched the duty manager read the screen. He watched the man's eyes move down the page, stop, return to the top. He watched the color leave Newbury's face in the specific way it leaves a person who has just understood the last 30 minutes of his life in reverse. The atrium did not go silent all at once. It went quiet in a ring spreading outward from the desk as the people nearest understood and passed it back to those behind them. Serena heard it from her assistant, who had been standing close enough to read over Girard's shoulder. The assistant leaned in and said 4 words. Serena's expression did not change immediately. She turned and looked at Graham, at the overnight bag on the floor, at the flannel shirt, at the man she had offered $10,000 to move, and her face did something she did not seem to have planned. "You own it," she said. Graham told her the full structure, the trust, the holding company, the 14 properties. He told her he had driven from Timmins that morning because his granddaughter was in surgery, and this was the building the surgeon had asked him to be in. Girard's phone rang, he answered, said yes twice, and held it across. Marion Sutcliffe's voice came through clearly enough for the nearest people to hear. She apologized. She said she was opening an immediate property review. that an executive was being dispatched from Mississauga, and that she needed to know what he wanted done about the staff involved. Graham listened to all of it. Then he said the thing that no one in that atrium had predicted. Nothing, he said, not tonight. He said that no employee was to be suspended, escorted out, or spoken to on the floor. He said that the woman with the conference booking was to be accommodated in whatever suite the property could provide, and that if anyone attempted to interfere with her business schedule, he would treat it as a personal instruction, disregarded. He said the only thing he wanted from Northgate Hospitality Group in the next 60 seconds was the same thing any guest holding a confirmed reservation was entitled to, which was the room. Gerard began to say that this was not a sufficient response. Graham said, "My granddaughter's name is Wren. She is 17 years old. She has been in surgery for 4 hours. That is the entire situation. Everything else is paperwork, and paperwork can wait until Monday." He picked up his bag and walked to Kim Delacroix, who was already holding the key card. He did not know she had printed it 6 minutes before anyone told her to. He paused. He told her she was the only person in the building who had done her job, and that he would not forget it. Then he walked to room 312. He sat in the chair by the window with his coat still on and did not turn on the television. He looked at the wall. He thought about a rink in Timmins with second-hand boards and a Zamboni that leaked at one corner, and a girl of 13 skating backwards at full speed because she had never once been afraid of falling. He thought about her mother, Carol, and the phone call 4 years ago, the kind where the voice on the other end takes a breath before speaking. He thought about driving Wren to her first day of high school in the old F-150, and how she had not looked back from the door. He had sat in the truck for a while before he drove away, and he had not been able to explain why. He thought about an envelope he had found in Carol's papers after the estate was settled. A savings account opened when she was 19 untouched, with a handwritten note clipped to the folder, for whatever Wren needs. Carol had not known what she was writing toward. She had only written it, and it had been enough. It had always been enough. At 7:42, his phone rang. A nurse named Chen introduced herself and said that Wren was in recovery, that the surgery had gone without complication, and that Dr. Nkemdi was asking to bring the family through the connector. He was at the recovery room in under 5 minutes. Wren was awake, barely. She turned her head when he sat down beside her and said his name in the flat, uncertain voice of someone not yet sure whether anything is real. He said he was there. He held her hand, which was smaller than he always remembered when he was not holding it, and he did not say anything else for a long time. What came after took 3 months. Graham returned to Timmins the following Thursday, with Wren in the passenger seat of the F-150, a hotel pillow wedged against the window so she could sleep. He came back to the Northgate Marquis on the Monday after that, through the staff entrance on Adelaide Street. He commissioned an independent audit of guest reservation practices across all 14 Northgate properties. He did not run it himself. He contracted an outside firm from Ottawa, gave them unrestricted access to every system, and instructed them in writing that no finding was to be softened on account of who had requested it. What came back was not a surprise, it was worse. The auditors found 212 instances across 19 months in which a confirmed guest reservation had been canceled, downgraded, or placed under administrative review within 25 minutes of a competing request from a high-value guest. 61 of those involved the same verification code that existed in policy as a fraud prevention tool and had been used in practice as a mechanism for displacing rooms. 11 of those 61 involved guests with documented medical circumstances, people who had noted a hospital visit in their booking, who had called ahead, who had asked for a specific room for a specific reason and had been quietly moved aside because someone with a better account number had arrived. Graham read that page twice and then wrote one line in the margin: "The policy that made this possible was mine." In 2018, on the recommendation of a legal team protecting the company from liability, he had approved language permitting a property to place a reservation under administrative review pending verification, with no requirement that the reason be documented at the moment of initiation. It had seemed reasonable at the time. It had taken one evening in a lobby in Toronto to show him what reasonable policy looks like when someone decides to use it as a weapon. The changes went out in November. A reservation could not be placed under review by a duty manager without a written reason logged at the moment of initiation, and a counter-signature from a second senior staff member. A confirmed guest could not be involuntarily displaced to accommodate a request from another guest under any circumstance, with no exception for loyalty tier, corporate account status, or booking volume. Every override was to appear on a monthly report distributed to the board, the regional directors, and the front desk staff at every property. Todd Newberry was not dismissed for what he had done to Graham Pallister. He was dismissed for the documented pattern. 27 separate instances across 16 months in which he had opened an administrative review on a confirmed reservation within 30 minutes of a competing request from a high-tier guest, and had closed 22 of those reviews by canceling the original booking. The termination letter cited the full count, because Graham had insisted the reason be stated in plain language. Kim Delacroix was promoted twice in the 4 months that followed, first to a supervisory role at the Marquee, and then into a position Marion Sutcliffe created at Graham's direction. Property compliance lead, a role whose primary function was the standing authority to override a duty manager on questions of guest rights without escalating to a general manager first. Kim had run a database query on a Tuesday afternoon because a man in a flannel shirt had stood at her counter and asked her to, and it had cost her nothing, and it had changed everything. Felix Girard received a formal commendation. He had acted within 6 minutes of being informed, and Graham told him 6 minutes was a fine number, and that the problem had never lived in the 6 minutes. Serena Blight was not banned from the property. She was not sued. In late October, she asked through an intermediary whether Graham would be willing to meet. He said yes. They met in a coffee shop in Yorkville, not a hotel, not a boardroom, and she came alone. She told him what she had done from beginning to end, without softening any part of it. She said she had used money first, and a phone call second, and that both had worked within 30 minutes, and that the speed with which they had worked had not left her mind since. She said she had spent the weeks after that evening going back through her firm's records, and had found 7 occasions in which her office had made similar requests at hotel front desks in 4 different cities, and that she had not known about 5 of them. She said not knowing had been the arrangement. She had asked for outcomes without asking what producing them required, and she had been handed outcomes, and had never once looked at the seams. She made restitution where guests could be identified, and resigned from her firm's advisory board. Graham thanked her for the meeting. He said nothing more, and she seemed to understand that his silence was neither forgiveness nor its refusal. She had told the truth in a room where she was not required to, and that was the part that mattered. The initiative was announced quietly in December. Graham had designed it to be quiet. It was called the Reserved Chair Fund, and it did one thing. When a person needed to be near a sick family member, or had been displaced through an error they could not fight, the fund paid for the room, and more importantly held a designated block of accommodation at every Northgate property that could not be reviewed away or reallocated under any circumstances, regardless of who was asking or what they were prepared to offer. Graham insisted on the second part more than the first. Money, he told Marion Sutcliffe during the single meeting they had on the subject, is the easy half. The hard half is making sure the room is still there when the person who needs it arrives. The fund assisted over 3,000 guests in its first year. Graham did not appear at any announcement or event connected to it. He went back to Timmins. He drove the same F-150. He bought his coffee from the same Tim Hortons on Algonquin, and the woman who knew his order by heart still believed he did something with land surveys, because that was what he had told her years ago and had never seen a reason to correct. Wren went back to the ice in February, 6 weeks before the physiotherapist had cleared her, and Graham sat in the stands at Timmins District Arena in the same jacket he always wore and watched her skate backwards at full speed, and did not look away until the session ended. He had built the company quietly, under layers of trust language and holding entities, because he had wanted to know how it felt to run a business from the inside, without anyone adjusting their behavior to account for the person watching. He had gotten his answer on a Tuesday afternoon in a hotel lobby, and he had spent the 3 months after that making sure no one else would have to find it out the same way. The world will measure a man by what he wears and what he carries and how much he appears to matter. It will measure him in the way a duty manager reaches for a keyboard, in the way a lobby goes quiet when a lanyard comes through a door, in the way an $8,000 offer is expected to settle a question that was never about money. But the people who actually moved anything that evening were a front desk associate who opened a record because a man asked her to, and a surgeon who told a grandfather to stay close, and a 17-year-old girl who said one word when she opened her eyes in recovery and meant it for everything. Never measure a man by what he appears to be carrying. The one standing in front of you in the worn flannel shirt, asking for nothing but what he is owed, may have built the floor beneath your feet, and the proof of who he is will be that he never once asked you to notice.